welcome back to Yee-Haw, a Bonanza podcast. I am your host, Melissa, and today we are going to be watching Season 1, Episode 6, The Julia Bulette Story. I'm very excited to watch and discuss this one today. I had so many thoughts on this episode. I think I took 5 or 6 pages of notes. There's just so much to discuss here. Initially, I was hoping to bring my sister Teresa back to talk about this episode, but as you guys know, my computer broke unexpectedly last week. I've been waiting for the new one to arrive, and I've just kind of fallen behind overall, and I didn't want to rush Teresa into it. So hopefully I'll be bringing her back on the show soon. Was kind of hoping to have her for this episode because there's just so many discussion points, and Teresa's just a great person to discuss things with, but no worries, we'll bring her back for another episode. So let's waste no time. Let's get right on into it. First things first, I am recording from my new computer today. Yay! I'm so excited. Upon getting this new computer, I quickly realized how bad of shape the other one was in. I didn't realize how much lagging I had on my old computer, and this one just gets things done in like less than a second. The speed is incredible, so I have a feeling the recording process is going to be much smoother today. The internet speed is even faster than it was before, so I'm feeling good about recording from here on out, so that's good. But we are back up and running, and we will hopefully have no more issues. Before we get into the Julia Bulette episode, we have some more thoughts from last week's episode, Enter Mark Twain, from Robert, and I do want to touch on those. And as always, guys, if you want to contribute to the show, if you want to share your thoughts or any plot points or something that you found interesting about this week's episode, or you loved it, you hated it, you were indifferent, I would love to hear your thoughts. So you can email me at meltyandjoys@gmail.com to share any positive, negative, rambly thoughts. I would love to hear them. Okay, so Robert says, I'm just going to say it right off the bat, this is my least favorite episode so far. That's not to say I hated it or even disliked it, but compared to the first 4, this is the weakest of the batch. First off, there's too much horse riding. I don't mind some or even a lot if something is going on, a chase, a conversation, but all the riding seemed to me like padding. I will say that it reminded me of that comment you made to your sister way back in episode 1 that all 4 actors were very good horse riders, and it sure does show in this episode. I think that's a huge plus for the series because I've seen too many cowboy movies with an actor in a studio on a rocking horse. At least Bonanza has avoided that. That is true, and now that I'm thinking back on the episode, I agree with you, Robert. There were a lot of horse riding shots. And honestly, yeah, they probably could have cut a handful of those out. I don't think all of them were necessary. But that is a good point also about the actors actually riding the horses instead of being in a studio. It does make a huge difference. Robert says, my biggest complaint is that there are several storylines that go absolutely nowhere. The only reason there is a young girl in this episode is to get a laugh with Josh about the spirit he wrote in the newspaper. They give her a very sad backstory, but her father was murdered and she ran off on her own. There's never any resolution or justice, just a pretty girl in a pretty dress. I bet she isn't in the next episode. I would agree with that. I think Rosemary was the weakest part of Enter Mark Twain. They had potential to do something interesting there, maybe tie it back to the antagonist, the political antagonist at the end, but it did feel like a super loose thread that makes you go, why was this introduced in the first place if it was only going to make for like a brief, funny scene? I definitely agree with that. Robert goes on to say, while I already knew that Samuel Clemens was Mark Twain, and Mark Twain took his pen name from the riverboats on the Mississippi River, I didn't know that his first pen name was Josh. I didn't either. See, you learn something new every day. That's part of the reason why I like the history inclusion in Bonanza. It just makes you curious and you learn something new. Now I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Samuel Clemens didn't decide on his new pen name, Mark Twain, in the middle of a gun battle. Perhaps I'm wrong. Hey now, the Cartwrights had a huge effect on Mark Twain's life. I don't know about you, Robert, but they were heavily involved in Mark Twain's life. Robert goes on to say, I did like the humor in this episode. This outing wasn't as dire as previous episodes. It was much lighter, but still had some danger and a couple of gunfights. Wasn't a fan of the controversy about the railroad trying to checkerboard its way across the Ponderosa. What the heck does that even mean? Also, what was with the judge's wife? Was she a spangly lady? I know she was a showgirl and was friendly to some men who weren't her husband, but that storyline went nowhere either. The only negative was that she liked gold and discovered that gold was too heavy for a flimsy nightgown. Was she supposed to show how the judge had bad judgment by being married to her? He liked having a pretty woman, no character flaw there. Anyway, after praising the writers in the last episode, I have decidedly less praised this episode. It wasn't a horrible episode, it was just weak in my opinion. You have some good thoughts here, Robert. I would agree with quite a few of them. I'm not as picky on the wife. Personally, of the politician, it felt like she was just a supporting character, so it didn't bother me that much that she wasn't as involved with the plot. I guess she just kind of showed how they weren't really morally sound people when it comes to politics. Like, they just wanted to be voted in because it gave them importance and status. So I guess she kind of highlighted that point, but I didn't care that much that she wasn't as developed. I think Rosemary is probably the bigger problem when you look at that. And heck, maybe they didn't even need to include the wife. I don't know. I like Enter Mark Twain because I think it's a very fun and enjoyable episode. I'd agree with you. I definitely don't think it's the strongest plot, but I think the character moments in that episode make up for the lack of engaging plot, if that makes sense. I appreciate you writing in, and as always, I really enjoy hearing your thoughts. I know, Robert, that you also have some thoughts at the end of today's episode, so if I have enough time at the end, I will make sure to read them. Otherwise, I'll just read them next week. I am working under a timeline today. My sisters have asked me to go see the new Wicked movie with them, depending on how long I ramble today. So we'll have to see on that. But as always, Robert, thank you so much for writing in and sharing your thoughts. I absolutely love reading them. Guys, if you want to share your thoughts, don't be shy. You can email me again at meltyandjoys@gmail.com. Any and all thoughts are welcome. I love talking about Bonanza with people, and I am a total dork, so do not be afraid to share any thoughts. And thank you to everybody who drops their comments or their thoughts underneath the YouTube video. I love reading those as well. So I have a few more thoughts on today's episode before we watch it, but let's just introduce the episode real quick, find out who wrote and directed it, who the cast is, and then I'll share some thoughts I have about this episode or some history that I learned about this episode, and then we can go ahead and watch it. Alrighty, so this episode is called The Julia Bulette Story. It was written by Al C. Ward, David Dortort, and Fred Hamilton. It was directed by Christian Nyby. It premiered October 17th, 1959, and its special guest of the week was Jane Greer, but it also featured Alexander Scourby, Roy Engel, Robert Stevenson, K.E. Kuter, I think is how you say the last name, Victor Sen Young, and Robert B. Williams, Mary Munday, that's an amazing name, Ken Dibbs, and Rush Williams. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Mary Munday is an amazing name. It's Mary, M-A-R-Y, Monday as in M-U-N-D-A-Y. The episode description is, Little Joe falls in love with an older woman, the owner of the town's saloon/brothel, much to the chagrin of his family, moralizing town leaders and creating a rival for her affection. First things first, let's look into Jane Greer's filmography. One thing I do know about Jane Greer, is that she appears in a Columbo episode called Troubled Waters. That's cool. When I eventually get to that Columbo episode again, that's gonna hit different now that I have more of a familiarity with Jane Greer. Let's see. Jane Greer is famous for the movie Out of the Past, 1947 film. I believe she plays a femme fatale in that movie, like a very famous femme fatale. I personally have not seen Out of the Past, but I would like to. She was in the film The Big Steal. She was in the film Station West, The Prisoner of Zenda. Her other credits on her IMDb page include Perfect Mate, Immediate Family, Heartbeat, Twin Peaks. I did not know she was on Twin Peaks. Murder, She Wrote, The Law and Harry McGraw, Just Between Friends, The Insiders, Falcon Crest, Against All Odds, The Shadow Writers, Quincy M.E., Columbo, we already listed that, Burke's Law, gosh, Burke's Law. Obviously, Bonanza, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Man of a Thousand Faces. She was on a lot. She has, if you guys want to see all of her filmography, you can go on her IMDb page, but those are just a few of the films and television series that she appeared on. I really like her in this episode. I think that she has a lot of prowess, and I think she suited the character role very, very well, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Now, this episode is interesting because it covers yet another famous real-life historical figure, and that person this week is Julia Bulette. Now, I watched this episode all the way through a few days ago, took my notes, and then I decided to do some research into Julia Bulette and do some, research into the story. Because like I said last week, if you'll notice that so far Bonanza has done a great job in taking famous historical figures and incorporating them into the show. And a lot of that is due in part to the fact that the creator of the show, David Dortort, was a historian. He was a history major in college. He was a history major, and he was a creative writing major. And he loved history. So it becomes very prevalent the longer Bonanza goes on, because you can see all of these real life figures being weaved into these stories, and you can really see his personal passion for historical figures and incorporating them into Bonanza. I'm personally a really big fan of it because I think, like I said, it piques the audience's interest and it gets them curious about these figures, and you learn something new. After these episodes end, I want to go back, I want to start doing research on these figures just to see how well they were woven into the stories or what creative liberties the writers took while incorporating them into Bonanza. But I really appreciate it because I think it adds a layer of realism to Bonanza, and I like learning about history. So I thought you guys would appreciate that. Maybe I should do a separate episode on David Dortort here soon. Very interesting person. It just might be fun to do maybe more of a deeper dive on his background, before he came to write Bonanza. So let me know if you guys would be interested in something like that. And now to dive into the history of Julia Bulette. This is a very interesting episode because Julia Bulette in the 1850s and the 1860s was a famous prostitute, specifically during the Comstock Lode when that was going on. She was murdered at the age of 34 or 35. It's kind of unclear, in 1867, and a French drifter named John Mullane was quickly convicted and hanged for the crime. Interestingly enough, John Mullane denied killing her. He claimed he was a scapegoat in the actual crime. And to push this even further, John Mullane's hanging was witnessed by Mark Twain, which is craziness. So there you go. There's a little bit of history on Julia Bulette. I actually did a deep dive into her life because I was interested, and I found all of these articles. And I think y'all would be surprised at how much historical accuracy they pulled from her life and put into Bonanza. There's a little mention near the middle to the end of the episode with firefighters, or the mention of the firefighters, and it turned out in real life, she was super involved with charity work to help the community and help the firefighters, and she was really involved, and apparently, when people got super sick around her, they got super sick in the hospital, she would actually go and interact with the people in the hospital who nobody else would touch. Crazy stuff. I could probably sit here for 20 minutes and give you guys a deep dive into her life, but obviously they took a lot of creative liberty. Not everything is accurate in the episode because you gotta push and pull and change certain things to make it fit within the context of your story, but I think it would surprise you guys to know that a lot of the information included in this particular Bonanza episode is actually accurate. So if you want to learn more about Julia Bulette, I would recommend that you do your own research because some of it is honestly surprising. Also, I do have to say, they handled this episode very well for a story that is about little Joe interacting with a famous prostitute. I do think they handled it really well, especially because they never use the word prostitute once in this episode. This story relies heavily on innuendo and subtle dialogue that clues the audience in on just what kind of person Julia is. And I really respect it for that. I think they handled it very, very well. I think they handled it very delicately. And I think they had a very interesting story on morality and how to treat people and our actions. Oh, yeah. Before we watch this episode today, I checked it out on the box set, and they had a lot of sensual shots of Jane Greer and Michael Landon together, and they had a lot of classic, gunfighter character stills of Michael Landon on there. So they didn't have very much, but it's always still cool to see, to kind of get insight as to what it must have been like on the set when, they were taking those pics or pictures in between takes. So, but not very much on the box set this week. All right, guys, let's get our episode pulled up. Just a quick heads up. The episode copy that I've pulled up is on Daily Motion, and for some reason the episode skips the theme. So maybe you'll just have to skip ahead in this video to line up with your own copy, but I just wanted to give you guys a heads up in case I can't edit in the theme for this particular Bonanza episode, but I did want to say that before we dive on in today. All right, we are hitting play in 3, 2, 1, go. This is such a cute intro. Oh, the little hug Haas gives him here is so sweet. Suck it, Adam. Historical figure number 1, John Mullane. I love how the Cartwrights run towards the danger when there's a shootout in an episode. Always ready to jump into action. Oh. That jump right there, that was a superhero jump. That was an acrobatic jump. She's about to Looney Tunes him. That was such a cartoony whack. Boy, she is so good in this role, and she wears those dresses fabulously. Oh, I should mention the soundtrack in this episode, fabulous. The piano playing throughout this episode is stunning, and I love the use of the song Love Me Tender by Elvis Presley. And it was very interesting because at this point, I believe the song Love Me Tender was only 3 years old. I believe it came out in 1956. Hmm. There is some really, really good dialogue in this episode. Very quotable episode. I think I made a list of quotes from this one. There's so much good dialogue throughout. Ben's jacket here, by the way, 10 out of 10. I love this whole outfit. I think that's like the nicest he ever dresses when he goes into town, with maybe the exception of a few scenes in a few episodes. But that whole outfit is fantastic. Okay, what was this history? Did did he know of her in New Orleans? What was the history here? It was a very ambiguous relationship. I mean, I get the impression it was just that Ben knew of her, and it was just a very cordial interaction most of the time, but it's very mysterious. I love the way Ben stares at that guy, into that guy scooting down. He's like, "You gonna move?" Bonanza. Wait, is this the guy who plays Doc Martin, the gentleman standing up front? I think it is. There is such an interesting theme of morality in this episode. It gives you a lot to think about, I think. I didn't love that implication there. um yes, Roy Engel played Dr. Paul Martin. I believe this was his first appearance throughout the remainder of the series. She was so good in this role, Jane Greer was. She had the acting prowess and just the presence for this role. She was great. And apparently Julia Bulette in real life did a lot of charity work. Yikes, what a comeback. You only stay alive because no grave will have you. That's another great line. There is a lot of good dialogue in this episode. Though that comeback was great. No grave will have you. Woo! Little Joe. Sick burn. I'm also getting flashbacks to A Rose for Lotta here. Same set, same kind of vibe. Snub you on Sunday, come to your place on Monday. He's not fit to wipe your shoes. What is the age difference here? Just out of genuine curiosity. Is it like 20 years at least? No. Wait a minute. If Little Joe's 18, and if they're going off the timeline of her age at death, that make her 34. I'm not sure that's a great thing to say to a woman, Joe. The quotes popped off in this episode. They were waxing poetry in this one. Little Joe. Gosh. I'm a big fan of this scene. I also love how they're like, hey, no shady action, but they respect the duel itself. I love that. Not the old hit him in the face with the hat trick. It's Captain Kirk move right there. Pretty good stunts. I love their casual commentary here. It's so great. You know, it begs the question, how many times has Little Joe been in this situation? How many times have they watched this? This is so awesome. Just the entire vibe of this sequence is so chill and casual. It's moments like that that make this show so great, these character moments. He looks like such a little kid. That is a very nice way of saying she's a prostitute. There's actually in this episode something I loved was just the character examination of Ben and Little Joe. I thought it was really nicely done. Does his hair get darker in later episodes? Roy Engel. Uh, Maybe his hair doesn't get darker and I'm just overthinking it. Mm. Whoop. My bad. I just dropped my pen. The morality undertones in this episode are so interesting, and just the hypocrisy of the townspeople as well. He's about to tell her to back off in the politest way. Wasn't he 5 when she died? You can understand little Joe's motivation in this episode when it comes to Julia, but you can also see his naivete. And I really like that. I love how forthright Ben is here too, but in a very gentle and polite way. I just love how forward he is. The strong father figure looking out for his kid. That looks like the itchiest nightgown. Boy, she's bold for that. This is a great scene. Such a good quote. That's interesting. Also a great quote. This episode just popped off with great quotes and great dialogue. Also, a little bit of interesting information we get on Marie, on how people treated her differently. But it's interesting from Joe's character, like a character standpoint, because is it that Joe's too naive to believe in the goodness of other people, or he won't see her flaws, or he is comparing Julia to his mother Marie. There's so many interesting themes to unpack here. That's a very fair concern. Adam's partial shrug. Oh my gosh, there's just so much I want to talk about here, but I don't want to talk over the entire episode. Classic Adam quip. Sarcastic with a smile. Hmm. This is a really good episode for insight into Joe's character and, you know, what he feels passionate about. Oof. Cold line. Oof. Now, what is the fever? And here we see the hypocrisy. Interesting use of that Bible quote. And interesting how they display the two sides of Julia Bulette, because this aspect of her character was actually true in real life. This is a nice little scene. I'm glad they added this. A funny little character moment. I also miss how long and unruly Haas's hair used to be here. The way it like curls behind his ears. It's a little longer in the back. I like it. I can't confirm I would do the exact same thing. This is a nice little moment. It's such a great little scene. Okay, then. This episode made me think of the story of Mary Magdalene from the Bible when I was watching it. don't. Oh, little Joe, your infatuation. Hmm. You know, I get the impression in this episode that little Joe believes that either he's completely naive to Julia's lifestyle or he's determined that he can fix her or love her into being different. The Love Me Tender musical motif is a really nice touch that I wouldn't have expected, but I feel works really well. Did you guys see the way Ben patted that guy's face so aggressively? I feel, oh man, this episode does a great job of showing the strengths of Joe's character, but also his weakness and his youthfulness, his naivete. Well, I don't know if I agree with that, Ben. Oh God, so many good quotes. I like how Ben shifts the responsibility back over to her. She was perfect for this role. Now, John Mullane was just here for further historical accuracy, or somewhat of historical accuracy, at least for the end. But he wasn't really a character, was he? She was drinking that, dude. You're acting like a prostitute. Sacramento City. Yeah, back off, John. You don't know who you're messing with. I like that she's just ignoring Joe completely. Cold. Very, very, very cold. This episode reminds me a little bit of the season 5 episode, She Walks in Beauty, with Haas and Gina Rowland's character. I can't remember her name, but the vibe is kind of similar here. It's not the exact same, but it reminds me a little bit of that episode. Oop, premonitious. Excelsior, the pale beer, or fine pale beer, whatever that sign said. I love Adam and Haas in the supporting roles in this episode. Just being the protective big brothers looking out for him. I always love how they're looking out for him in these little ways. Michael Landon did a great job in this episode. Something else I really like about this episode is all the characters, Ben, Little Joe, and Julia all learn something. I really like that. The darling of the firefighters. That is wild. I'm just going to say that now. That's craziness. And Little Joe's relationship to her very much feels like I can fix her and infatuation as opposed to actual attraction. I liked Adam's face. He looked really awkward there. That is also a great quote. Good Lord. That's the perfect quote to sum her character up. You won't last very long. The law enforcement changes episode to episode in season 1. Aw. Aw. The music in this episode was a main character. It was so gorgeous. Again with the full face of makeup. I get why they did it, but she looks pretty great for just having been stabbed. Yeah, wow. This episode really does highlight how young Little Joe feels. It's also really sad to watch Julia put on this act in the last 5 minutes of the episode to push Joe away. It's really sad, actually. She laughs a little like Jean Smart. I know that's a interesting comparison, but she laughs a little like Jean Smart. Aw. I do like this concept that Joe was able to break Julia down because he was kind to her, and that shook her. Having faith in no one carries a specific kind of security. You and your son have destroyed it. I really love that. Little Joe was able to get to her just with his gentility. Oh, what they do with the piano here too is perfect. This is a really great final poignant scene. Oh, that's so good. So good. Oh my gosh, just the lights going out was perfect. That's literally all you needed. Such a great touch. Love me tender, love me sweet. Oh my gosh. Just the way that ending was handled was perfect. That's exactly the way that should have ended. I love the symbolism there. But I think that episode is quite good. Honestly, like, some of those quotes and some of that dialogue was really amazing. I might have to make a list of all of those quotes because they were so good. Just poetry. I love, 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 love that line from Julia. Having faith in no one carries a specific kind of security. You and your father, or you and your son, have destroyed that. But the dialogue was great, really engaging. This episode is really good as a character examination of Ben and little Joe. I think it highlights Joe's strength as a character, but it also highlights Joe's weakness as a character. Like, Joe is really passionate and he believes in justice and treating people fairly, and he doesn't like the hypocrisy. But the flip side of that is he allows his emotions to get the better of him. He's really infatuated with Julia, specifically because of his mother and that relationship that he never really had when he was a kid. And so he kind of took it as his responsibility to fix Julia a little bit. You know, you get the idea that the relationship is less based on I'm in love with you and more of I'm infatuated with you and I can make you a better person, or I can help make your life better. And that's just not the good basis of a relationship. So I like how they acknowledged both of those sides. I also like how they acknowledged Julia's good sides and Julia's bad sides. And they also acknowledged the good and bad sides of Ben as well. You know, he wants to look out for little Joe and be involved and not have his reputation ruined, but also, like, he's also making judgments about Julia and jumping to assumptions, and I like how they acknowledge that side of his character as well. I also appreciate that conversation that Ben and Little Joe had on Marie. I thought that was really good. I like how Ben gets offended when Little Joe brings up Marie in comparison to Julia, and how Ben's like, don't you dare. They are two different women on either sides of the mountain, and your mother was nothing like her. I like how he gets defensive, but I like how Little Joe calls out Ben's hypocrisy by being like, hey, you know, my mother was different, but, you know, to see a scar, you've also got to be looking for a scar. So I like how he calls Ben out on that, but also Ben tries to warn Little Joe of his naivete and how he's allowing his infatuation with his mother to blind his judgment when it comes to Julia. There's just so many great character moments in this episode to appreciate, and I wish I had the opportunity to bring my sister Teresa on for this week, because I feel like she would have had a lot of interesting things to say as well. But I like how all of the main characters, you know, Julia, Ben, and Little Joe all learn something by the end too. Like Julia learns in the end, like she doesn't want to manipulate Little Joe. Like in the beginning, I think that she's a little bit more cynical in her relationship towards him, like, this young naive kid, and then she's really broken down because of Little Joe's kindness to her, and I really like that. Something I love about this episode is how they never mention the word prostitute once. You know, everything in this episode, it relies on implication. They trust their audience to pick up on what this is. And particularly through the use of dialogue, they clue you in on what's going on without really saying it. And I really, really, really respect that, especially because Julia Bulette was such a controversial figure. But I think the episode's writers really handled that well. And I think that is a showcase of strong writing when you're able to do things subtly like that and have your point still come across. I thought Michael Landon did a great job with this episode. I think it's a really good character episode for Little Joe. I think he's easily the best defined character so far. There are some obvious changes in his portrayal in later seasons, but he was very consistently the most recognizable from the first season onward. I think his acting was great in this one. He's naive. He's trying to separate himself from his family. He's trying to make his own judgments, but his character is very well defined. I don't know. I thought his acting was great. Jane Greer, fabulous. She suited that role perfectly. She had such a presence. Gorgeous, had the prowess. And I really liked Lauren Green's characterization in this episode as well. Very involved, very concerned father. I'm so used to the dad trope nowadays being played off as dumb or stupid or just not as involved in their kids' lives. And I just really appreciate the positive role model spotlight that they give to Ben. They don't dumb down his character. He's very involved, and I really appreciate that. All in all, guys, I think that this episode is a really tight script, and I think they wove in the story of Julia Bulette very, very nicely. I guess that's tally 2 for the amount of women that die on Bonanza season 1, so I guess we got to count that as tally 2. Julia Bulette joins Emily Pennington on the list of women who have died so far in Bonanza, so we'll have to see how that list increases. I think it's a really strong episode, and I think it's very engaging, and it leaves a lot to talk about. So guys, as always, I would love to hear your thoughts on Little Joe's characterization, Ben's characterization, Julia's characterization. What did you guys think about that? What did you think about how they wove Julia Bulette's story into Bonanza? As always, do not forget to drop a comment and let me know your thoughts, or if you want to send an email to me delving deep into a particular topic of a certain episode, feel free to email me at meltyandjoys@gmail.com, and I would love to share your thoughts on the show. I am going to have to get going here in a few minutes, but I think I can make time to read Robert's comment this week for the Julia Bulette story. So let's go ahead and do that, and then we will close out today's episode. Robert says, I love this episode. It's my favorite episode so far. I like the drama and the love story. The episode isn't perfect, but it's really close. Spoiler alert, the tally is now 2. It is dangerous to allow a Cartwright to fall in love. It is dangerous for women to allow a Cartwright to fall in love with them. Ben has buried 3 women that we know of. Haas lost one, and now Little Joe. Adam is next. Yeah, the Cartwright curse is no joke. The writing here is great. There are so many quotable lines. The plot is a clever play on the dangers of allowing one's reputation to be ruined, but at this time it's a man and not a woman whose reputation is at stake. Great job by the writers. I agree. My only quibble with the writing is that I wanted the backstory to Ben and Julia's relationship. I was shocked that they not only knew each other, but were on a first-name basis. I agree with that. I am very curious as to what that relationship was. To me, it came off as Ben knows of her and knows of her reputation and has run across her a couple of times, but he's always kept it like very cordial. Robert says, while I wanted the whole history, the writers probably made the right decision to leave it mysterious and ambiguous. Yeah, I agree with that. My other quibble was the fever. What was the fever? I know it had to do with the water, but they never named it. That's true, but I guess it wasn't important enough. It was just a fever that nobody wanted to help out with. I've also noticed that the Cartwrights always run towards gunfire. I've observed that there are an inordinate amount of arm shots during gunfights. Is that good aim or just good luck? I don't know. A lot of people get shot in the arm on this show, including some of the Cartwrights. That was a huge wooden mallet Julia used to knock out John Millen. It was almost cartoonish. I guess concussions weren't a thing back then. Yeah, that was pretty cartoony, but you can't hate it, you know? I loved the line, would you like to spend a few minutes with him or an evening with me? Wow. I also liked it when Ben is trying to explain things to little Joe and he says, she's seen much more of the world than you. A very polite way of saying she's a slut. Yeah, I agree. Again, innuendo. I love how the writers used innuendo. I thought that was handled incredibly well. I also love the scene with Hop Sing and Hoss loading the barrels. I laughed out loud. The look on Hoss's face when he realized he might be getting played is priceless. Now that's great acting. Other notable quotes, a scar doesn't disappear just because you wash it. Fantastic quote, might be one of my favorites in the episode. A dirty little town on a mountain. A man stays where he's needed. I won't gamble with something I can't replace. Also a great line from Ben. Having faith in no one carries a certain kind of security. I totally agree. The writers on this episode, Fred Hamilton, David Dortort, and who was the third one I named? Al C. Ward. They popped off on the dialogue in this one. And the dialogue was really, really good. You can get so many quotes out of this one. Robert, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts this week. I always enjoy reading them. I agree. I think this episode was very, 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 very good. And the dialogue was absolutely a highlight. But guys, if you want to write in, you can contact me at meltyenjoys@gmail.com, and I would love to read your thoughts on the show. I think that just about sums up today's episode. Let me know what you think. Drop a comment, email me. I would love to hear your thoughts. And I will see you guys next week, where I think we are watching a episode that is a personal favorite of mine. Let's see. Yes. Next week, we are watching the saga of Annie O'Toole. I will not spoil it for you guys, but it stars the delightful Ida Lupino as Annie O'Toole, and it is another Adam-centric episode. It is a very fun one. I will say that. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day wherever you are, and I will see you in the next episode. Have a great day, everybody.